the gently flickering firelight cast a long, long shadow over the rough dirt floor. It started all the way at the feet of this elderly woman. She was propped up by several pillows, and she was warming herself by this modest fire in her modest home. And the shadow crept along the rocky floor. It buried its head in the dark doorway, and it showed that she was in deep thought. She was hunched over with her hand on her chin, thinking about the past years of her life. Her thoughts were, at this point at least, stuck in the past, because right at this moment, she was eagerly anticipating word about an event that meant a lot to her life at this point, but also to her future as well. But she couldn't help remembering, first of all, that day when she met her future husband, the wedding, the new chapters of life that just seemed to come wave after wave, like a scroll unfurling. She felt like each new day was exciting and adventurous, and especially the first challenge that they met was a severe famine that drove them to a whole new place. It made them foreigners in a new land where they had to explore new options, and that was tough enough. But once they started this new life, she remembers that one night when her husband stumbled into the doorway, soaked to the bone, and carrying their lost sheep that had strayed that very night. He had been out all night in the midst of the storm and downpour, and he came back not only with the sheep in his arms, but a rasping cough in his throat as well, which grew worse, turned into a burning fever. She did everything she could, but soon she couldn't, just very vividly in her mind, she remembered that choking sound as he was trying to breathe, and then finally his last breath. What followed that? Well, a new life once again with her sons. They got married, they started their own homes. But again, a mysterious illness took over their bodies, and she still remembers that night where they hovered over them as well and saw them finally expire. These thoughts made her heart ache, and she just remembered at that time feeling so alone, not just because of the family she had lost, but also because she was anticipating her daughters-in-law also leaving as well, immediately following that to start a new life in their own home country as she headed back to her hometown. But after saying goodbye to one of them, there was one memory that was keenest in her mind. Standing in the roadway, she was almost grabbing her by the shoulders, saying, "You can't come with me. You have to go home, because that is your only option for a new life, for a family, for a legacy, for a future." And she responded, this one daughter-in-law, not with an argument, but with an oath. Before Naomi and before God, she said, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates me from you." Think back to what that must have meant to Naomi at this point as she's awaiting Ruth to return back home. She knows where she's gone, but she's wondering what the result will be. And thinking back to Ruth's declaration, this is a covenant that she is making between God and between Naomi. It is a huge commitment, and it's fascinating to read this particular turn in the story, because really, up to this point, the entire book has been about Naomi. This is when the story kind of veers towards Ruth a little bit more, but pretty much the whole opening scene, the introduction, even after this, Naomi figures prominently in the book, and even the conclusion is mainly about Naomi. So why isn't this called the book of Naomi? Is the question that I was thinking. Like, why is it the book of Ruth? Where is the logic in that? Well, as you can see, immediately when Naomi first returns back to Bethlehem, she is going through a very big struggle. We can read that in our Bibles here, starting in verse 19. Feel free to take those with me at this time. Let's read it together. Verse 19 in Ruth chapter 1, it talks about the very next event in the story. So they too went until they came to Bethlehem, and it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that all the city was moved about them, and they said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said unto them, "Call me not Naomi, call me Mara," which means bitter. "For the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me?" Does it sound like Naomi's faith is in a very strong place right now? She's struggling, isn't she? And this faith struggle that she's experiencing needs what Ruth provides by God's grace, through God's power, of course. But when you look at the story of Ruth, it all centers around a Hebrew word. That word is chesed. Yes, you do have to gargle a bit to get the word out. Chesed is the word behind this story. And it basically means, sometimes it's translated kindness, but basically this word means covenant love. Not just love in the sense of agape, like it says in the New Testament, but covenant love, like Ruth has shown in her oath to God and to Naomi. And you could say that love that comes with a strong commitment is another way of saying it. And this really got me scratching my head, because taking this principle from the book of Ruth and planting it today in our day and age, in our culture, does it feel like our culture, it might be just me, but does it feel like our culture has a bit of an allergy towards commitment in our day and age? And I see some heads nodding, but for those who agree with me on this, what are some examples of how in our culture in particular, commitment tends to be something people shy away from?
Marriage.
That's a big one, isn't it? Yes, definitely. Marriage is something that's very, 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 at least in most people's mind, I should say, in our culture, optional more than it ever was, isn't it? And that's, definitely a sign. What else?
Committing to work in church.
Committing to work in church? Yes. That is one that as I was talking about this in the other church I was pastoring and preaching at, that came up again, like committing to one community where you pour your life and heart and ministry into, and where your membership is there and your resources are a part of that common life. That's a commitment, isn't it? And it's a commitment that a lot of people find hard to make. And I mean, you could go on and on. Commitment goes along with the whole idea of a lack of trust in our society as well, where people are distrustful of their neighbors, of the principles of society, of their leadership, of many things. And not only that, but I would say today's culture is unique in that options tend to multiply left and right. You know, when you go to a grocery store, I can conceive of back in the day, like decades ago, there being maybe 1, 2, 3 brands to choose from for whatever you're getting. Or at the store, if you're getting something more like an auto part or a digital device or what have you, dish soap, it could be anything. But you stare at the shelf and it's like you have a whole menu of options at your fingertips, right? And if you go on your phone trying to do shopping online, it doesn't get much better, does it? And that's the culture we live in. It's like every advertiser is vying for your attention so that you'll pick up their product. and they're all bearing down on you at once. Whether it's the choices are multiplied, whether it's what cell phone you'll go with, what shoe brand you'll buy, what dish soap you'll choose, what book will you read, what TV show will you watch, they're all spread out, and it's paralyzing in a lot of cases too. But that's the thing. People want more than ever to keep their options open. And taking that principle and running with it goes against, friends, the covenant love principle that Ruth, at least when it comes to relationships, is giving us in this story. Because it's clear that there's going to be a lot riding on this covenant love oath from Ruth. I mean, first of all, when they get home, her first task is going to make a home for Naomi. And that's going to involve providing food. That's going to involve setting up the house and furnishings. It's going to involve a safe place to sleep. It's going to involve all the things that you need to survive, the necessities of life. And she jumps right in when they get back to Bethlehem. She says, all right, the first thing I need to worry about here is, what are we going to have for dinner? What are we going to eat? So she immediately starts gleaning. She joins the other widows in the community, and she starts finding fields where there's leftover grain and gleaning what she can to provide. And that is where she realizes, I have to say, when I look at Ruth, I just have so much admiration, because she's not only covenanting with Naomi to say, I'm going to love and provide for you and support you the rest of your life. She actually has a plan in place too. She's taking initiative. She's leading the way. She is doing her best to make a strategy in order for them to survive here in Bethlehem. And she finds a kindly landowner named Boaz, who not only provides grain in his field for her to pluck, but also he provides protection as well, which was essential back then for both her and Naomi as well. In order for her not to be bullied or molested, she needed a place where she could gather grain safely. And Boaz provides that. But he also goes beyond that as well. He provides her with extra resources. He asks her to come and eat a meal with him and his workers. He asks that anyone who spots anyone mistreating her reports immediately to him, and he deals with it on the spot. He is there to support her in many ways, and this also catches the eye of Naomi as well. And this is where the story takes a whole new turn and really got me scratching my head. So fasten your seatbelts, because I'm going to go over a chapter here, the chapter 3 in verse 1. So let's read. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? It's as if she's saying, Ruth, you've done so much for me. You've poured out your heart and life in covenant love, making that commitment, and you stuck with it. I want to do something for you now. And I want to help provide a home for you. That's what this text is talking about, to seek rest for you, my daughter-in-law. I want to help you find a home and help provide that after you've provided so much for me and built up this place. Just as it says in Proverbs 24, Ruth built a house and established it through God's wisdom and by relying on the Almighty. But then, that's a admirable aim and admirable motive. But I have to admit, I was a bit shocked, even after reading this story many times. I was a bit shocked by Naomi's suggestion about what to do next, because I was looking at it through new eyes. So this is what Naomi suggests in verse 2. Now is not Boaz our kindred, with whom maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself, therefore, and anoint thee, and put on thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor, but make not thyself known unto the man until he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be, when he lieth down, that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay thee down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do. And she said unto her, All that thou sayest unto me, I will do. So the reason why this took me aback at this point, shocked me more than ever, is because now that I'm a dad, and I do have a daughter, it made me see it in a fresh perspective. So cast your mind forward. Hypothetically speaking, if I'm forward in the future, if I, as a dad, 18 years from now, see my daughter running in the door, her face excited, she's all giddy with excitement, and she says, "Hey, Dad, you know that guy I've been going out with?" And I said, yeah, I remember him. Yeah, you've been dating. Seems like a great guy. It's good. He said, "I have a plan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the hairstylist. I'm going to have my hair all fixed up. I'm going to get the most expensive perfume I could find. I'm going to get all my makeup done. I'm going to get my prettiest dress on tonight. And I'm going to sneak into his dorm room under cover of darkness. And I'll get in the closet where there's just a peek, and I'll make sure I have the right bed figured out." So, okay, yeah, that's his roommate. No, that's the bed. Yeah, okay. And then once the lights are out, I'm going to sneak out, uncover him, curl up at his feet, and once he wakes up and gets chilly and raises up, I'm going to jump to the light, flash it on, and say, "Will you marry me?" Yeah, sweetheart, I'm pretty sure we're going to lock all the doors from the outside and keep you at home tonight. No, that's not happening. I mean, can you imagine, though, as a parent, wouldn't that sound like a, well, to be frank, crazy idea? I mean, but no, Naomi, as the parent figure, she's suggesting it. And I know there's a tradition behind this, that Naomi isn't just probably pulling this out of thin air. But what is the motive behind it here? I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? What is Ruth and Naomi thinking? Well, I believe firmly, friends, that this is another example of covenant love. If Ruth comes to Boaz in front of everyone, in front of the workers, the town, publicly, and says, "You're my kinsman, will you marry me?" and Boaz refuses, he has just in one word brought disgrace both to her and his own name and family. And Ruth is saying, I don't want him to feel pressured. I don't want him to do this just out of obligation because he's in front of everyone and he's afraid of the repercussions. I want him to do this from the heart. Is he willing to do this out of love and to become my husband, because he not only wants to help us, but also he wants to live with me for the rest of his days. And that just shows, friends, again, the kind of woman that Ruth is in this text. She is bathed in covenant love. And there's a risk in this, too. I mean, if the word gets out, there could be some talking and gossiping about here. What if she loses her reputation? What if questions start being asked and gossiping ensues in the community around her? What if she ends up in a worse place? But the fact of the matter is, friends, that Ruth is willing to go through with this plan because she loves Naomi and she loves Boaz. She has commitment and covenant love. And as we can see in the story, it says in verse 9, this is after Ruth has carried out the plan, Boaz awakens, and he said, "Who art thou?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman." And he said, "Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast showed me more kindness." There's that word, chesed in Hebrew, kindness, covenant love. "You have showed me more covenant love in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou followest not after the young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, fear not. I will do to thee all that thou requirest for all the city of my people. Know that thou art a virtuous woman." We know that Boaz, he follows through. He takes his responsibility seriously as the kinsman and redeems both Ruth, their land, the family name, Naomi, and that's also, by the way, a big illustration of the redemption that Jesus offers us as well as his followers. He redeems us and buys us back with his own blood that he shed at the cross. But here's the thing. The reason, really big reason, why I love this book so much and the story of Ruth is that we not only live in a culture that's addicted to, well, I should say allergic to commitment, but we also live in a culture that's addicted to bigness, where everything has to be sensational and larger than life. We have to have, the world's addicted to big money, big success, big influence, big followings, big audiences, big plans, big reputation, and it's easy for success to only look like something that's really huge and monumental and enormous, right? I mean, people are all about how can we get that magic concoction so that our YouTube video will go viral and it'll reach billions of people and it'll be awesome and woo! But even though that's America's mantra, when we look at Ruth's story here, really the big impact that she made only included 2 people, right? Boaz and Naomi. She had that covenant love for 2 people who were dearest and closest to her. And she didn't try to change the world, but instead she sought to make a world of difference in the lives of these 2 individuals. Now, don't get me wrong. We do as a church have a huge mission that we're wanting to focus on here as a church of spreading the gospel and have a global impact for by God's grace and through God's power. That's definitely the case because Jesus says, go out into all the world, right? But here's the thing. This global mission of reaching out everywhere across the planet can only happen when we do it one church at a time in the neighborhoods where God has planted us. And that means not trying to reach 1 million people through some web platform, but instead, how can we reach and prioritize the people within our sphere of influence right here? Think about your neighbors, friends. Are there people who are struggling right now? Are there people who could use a heart-to-heart conversation, an encouraging word, a handshake, some welcoming warmth if they're new to the community? And also, let's really take this to the basic level. Parents, we can see this story encourage us to prioritize our children and family, of course, generally, but especially our kids as well. And that's where I want to speak directly to especially those parents with younger kids. Do you have a discipleship plan? Something to think about. It doesn't have to be just for little tiny kids either. Do you have a discipleship plan for your adolescent even? Do you have a discipleship plan for maybe a plan not in the sense of discipling them on a regular daily basis, but do you have a plan for reaching out to family members who haven't met Jesus yet or who are struggling spiritually? And it's not that you're trying to control their spiritual life, it's just being ready to be available to them, to be that covenant love influence that they need in their lives. It could be as simple as a listening ear, friends. And by the way, listening isn't a simple matter, even though it sounds simple. It involves a great deal of energy and focus on our part in order to really be there for someone else. Providing a safe place for young people especially, but anyone in particular, to work through those hard questions of life and be okay with listening to their doubts and questions too. That is a huge part of covenant love. So let's think about, especially in view of what happened after this love story between Ruth and Boaz, Ruth does have a part to play in the larger history of the plan of salvation that God authored from the beginning, doesn't she? What's her place in that story? The lineage of Jesus. That's right. Her son contributes a huge part to the lineage that would give rise to the Messiah. And in a very real sense then, friends, her story, even though she had the covenant love that was focused on just 2 individuals, her story affects us all, right? Across the whole history of planet Earth, she has an influence that we can only see in light of eternity. So let's consider, friends, how this applies to us. First of all, practically speaking, we must make time for prayer. And I am pointing this lesson towards myself more than anyone, because you'll ask my wife, when I get up in the morning, I am gone. I get up and I'm like, oh, I have so many things to do. I got to jump right in and start getting everything done as quickly as possible and make sure. I really need friends, and I need accountability on this board, to be honest. I need the very first thing I ever do when I wake my eyes and gather myself up, I need to hit the floor with my knees. That's what all of us can do, the very first thing. I'm not saying that you have to, at the very first conscious thought, hit the floor and then spend 2 hours just there praying. Instead, just take a while. It could be 5 minutes just to start the day on the right foot with a prayer. That doesn't mean you're not going to come back to God and pray more later on. I'm not saying we should only spend 5 minutes in prayer, but make that the priority and pray about those closest to you first and foremost. We have a prayer list, but let's keep those priorities. Our children, our family, our friends, our neighbors, make sure those are the people that we pray about and intercede for first before we go on. And secondly, make listening a priority. We have a world that tends to barge in at every chance, don't we? And this is another area I need growth. Sometimes I grab my phone and the headlines start spinning and I start scrolling through them before I even take the chance to just sit down and listen intentionally to my wife. Does the world really need me to listen more than my family does? It's a tough thing to deal with, but it's the truth, friends. We need to be there to listen to those closest to us, starting with family, and then our neighborhood and neighbors, of course, and our close friends and our church family. These people need to be closest to us and be our priority every day. And that's a big part of Ruth's story, too. She knew how amazing the God of the Hebrews, of the Israelites is, because she had been listening. And finally, don't be afraid to take risks for the right cause either. Remember that Ruth took a huge, bold, risky move, but she did it out of covenant love. She wasn't worried about her own reputation or prospects or even safety, because she had put her dear, dear mother-in-law first and wanted to do what was best for her. And we can do the same thing for our families, our neighbors, and our community. This elderly woman sank exhausted into her deck chair after trimming her roses, and she hadn't spent that long. It had only been maybe 20 minutes of trimming little vines here and there, but she was realizing every single day it felt like her strength and well of energy was getting shallower and shallower, and she knew why. Just several months ago, she had been diagnosed with leukemia. And the radiation, the chemo treatments were in full swing. She didn't feel like even getting out of bed some days, but she knew she had to in order to keep going. And she had heard it a dozen times. Mom or neighbor or friend, I think it's time for you to move into a facility. This is something you need to consider. But every time she said, nope, I'm staying put. The neighbors around her realized that she was fiercely independent. They realized they needed to step in, so they kept stopping by. They brought her food. They checked in on her. They made sure she was okay. Her daughter did the same, but she lived across town and wasn't able to be there all hours of the day because she had her job, but she would always check in every day, of course. But the one that really, really was her lifeline, the one who really stepped in and made a huge difference in her life, the one that brought a smile to her face as she began to drift off to sleep, was a 7-year-old named Caleb. He was there every single day, multiple times, like 4 or 5 times a day, because he knew her nap schedule. She had to take naps, and she took these on a regular basis, and he knew that she had a routine, so right when he realized that her nap time was about over, he would run over to her house across the street and make sure that she woke up from her nap. That was his commitment, his duty. He had taken that upon himself, and he was going to be there for her every single day until the end. Even in the midst of vacations, school, he made it a priority to be over there. every single day. Whenever it was remotely possible, he would always be there to make sure she was okay. Caleb faithfully visited Wilma, and because of that, they became family as well. And friends, it was obvious, just like the covenant love that Ruth showed to the whole community of Bethlehem, that whole neighborhood could see the covenant love of this 7-year-old boy on display as he ran over every day to visit this elderly woman. That is what covenant love is about. And I know this looks different for each of us in our different scenarios and situations, but let's think, how can we prioritize those closest to us by serving, listening, encouraging, lifting up? We have a whole mission field right at our fingertips all around us every day, friends. And let's learn to imitate the covenant love of Ruth in new and fresh ways every single day. Let's bow our heads. Lord, thank you that this covenant love of Ruth is so powerfully displayed in this book and in these pages, and teach us how we can make that a part of our lives every single day as well. I appreciate looking through this book and studying this together as a church community, and there's lots of opportunities. We're eager to see where they'll take us next, Lord, and we love you. Bless us as we go about our duties this week, and bring us together again so that we can continue learning about what discipleship means on a daily basis with you. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.